Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Sheikh Abdurraheem Green's YouTube channel. And if you haven't subscribed already, you should definitely subscribe. He uploads, I hope, regular content, although I haven't been checking, not as regular as he should. So, Sheikh Green, you're very interested in personal development.
Yeah.
Many of the people who've seen your lives have seen that you just don't speak about personal development from a surface perspective. You go deep, you look at research, you
Mm.
look at papers, you sort of analyze different approaches, and then you give this information to the public. Why do you think this is important for us as Muslims?
Okay, so good question. It's funny that it's funny you're asking because I was literally thinking about this today. This exact same issue I was thinking about today. And really it really comes down to the purpose of life. What's the purpose of life? Yeah. And we know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. That Allah tells us in the Quran that He did not create the human beings and jinn except to worship Him. So that we exist to worship Allah. But it's interesting that Abdullah ibn Abbas, he said that to worship Allah means to know Allah, right? So, I mean, he said this in explanation of this verse, right? That it means to know Allah. So, and there's this old adage that's very well, it's very common, it's very well known. It's not a hadith, but it's something that exists from ancient times. It's something that has been repeated by um our scholars and the mu'arifin, the people who know Allah and who have deep spiritual insights. And that is, if you want to know, to know God, you need to know yourself, right? So this self-knowledge, how? Well, the reason is because what has yourself been created for? So, in order to truly know yourself, you have to know that you have been created and you've been created by God for a reason and for a purpose. If you don't know that, if that's true, when I say if, I mean, obviously we know it's true. As Muslims, we know it's true. But I'm just posing it from a philosophical, psychological perspective. If
Yeah,
it's true that there is a God and it's true that this God created us with a purpose, anyone then claiming to have any insight into human psychology is going to be lacking. At the very least, it's going to be lacking. At the very worst, it's going to be totally, completely wrong, right?
yeah,
If you don't recognize this fundamental dimension of the human condition, right? So for me, the thing, it all comes together, right? But from our perspective, as Muslims, as people who have chosen, who have taken that decision to submit themselves and to surrender themselves to God, and that we have understood this important truth that the reality of you, the reality of your soul, the reality of your nafs, the reality of your human condition is that there is a creator. We've been created for a purpose, and all that comes with that, that life is a test. Then the more you understand about yourself, the more you understand about the human condition, the more you understand about how your mind works and how your mind doesn't work. Because a lot of the most interesting things, I think, are to do with cognitive biases,
yeah,
which are ways in which our minds, it's not fair to say our minds don't work. That's not true. Cognitive biases are really useful. They are actually so important for our survival. However, they are these shortcuts that we take because thinking takes a lot of energy. So we have these shortcuts that we take. We've learned throughout the ages these shortcuts, but they don't always help us. Sometimes these shortcuts that we have, they actually they cause us to make the wrong decisions, right?
yeah,
So knowing these things is very, very key. Yeah. So because I believe that, you see, that's it, to know yourself. What is it? I mean, this is very hugely deep. Yeah. But to know yourself means to know you're flawed. That's the first thing,
yeah,
right? We are deeply flawed. Yet at the same time, we are gifted with extraordinary capabilities. So we have extraordinary capabilities. The things that the human mind can accomplish are really mind-boggling. Right? I mean, okay, well, that's mind-boggling what the mind can accomplish. But the things that human beings have done, it's just incredible. Yet at the same time, we're deeply flawed. And it's understanding those two things, that paradox, that is very, very key. And that connection with Allah. And ultimately, I think for us, Sabur, and dear listeners, the most important, I think the key reason is that I don't think that you could really approach the topic of sincerity, which is, there's really two things. There's two things that are absolutely the most important things. If you're going to boil everything down to what is the purpose of life and how to worship Allah, it really boils down to three things. Number one is to have faith, to believe in Allah alone, that He alone is worthy of worship, that Muhammad is His messenger, and all that comes with that. But putting that aside, once you have faith, the two things are, number one, sincerity. Okay, that means that we have to try and do every act of worship sincerely and purely for the sake of Allah. Now, we can never know 100% whether we're sincere or not, but we have to work really hard for that. And that's the inner struggle. That's the jihad against yourself. That's the fight against your own ego, your own impulses. And that is where this whole topic of, I don't like this thing of self-development, but that's what it really is about. Because if you don't know yourself, if you don't understand your cognitive biases, if you don't understand the way your own mind tricks you, how are you going to be sincere? How are you going to know whether you're doing it sincerely for Allah or whether it's an impulse of the ego? So therefore, in order to even begin to understand the topic of sincerity, or to be sincere towards the issue of sincerity, you have to go deep inside this mind, right? And that's what our great scholars and the great, what, I don't know what the term, that the great, the people who have insight, because they're not necessarily scholars. There are people who have had very deep insights into the human mind and the human soul and the connection with Allah. They're not always necessarily the greatest scholars, but they spend a lot of time thinking about that spiritual condition. And it's so interesting because anyone who has read, those books from those great scholars and those people who understand these inner dimensions of the human being, and have read books on psychology, will say, wait a minute, our guys were figuring this stuff out 1,000 years ago, 600 years ago. Yeah. And this is, in fact, sometimes in fact, one brother told me, he said there are some things that he reads in books of psychology that literally seem to have been lifted word for word, from certain spiritual treatises that have been written by Muslims hundreds and hundreds of years ago. He literally said sentences lifted, because they understood that in order to be sincere, in order to really be sincere to Allah, you're going to have to first examine yourself very deeply, and you're going to have to look into yourself and think about what motivates you. Why do you do what you do? Why don't you do what you don't do? What's really going on in your head? If you're not ready to look at yourself in the mirror and really be honest about who you are and what you're not, how are you ever going to take this matter of sincerity seriously? And just quickly, of course, the other thing is that it's not just enough for your deeds to be sincere, but they have to be correct. Okay, so that's where the other dimension comes in of studying fiqh and of understanding fiqh, and that deep scholarly and that other path of being able to understand the Sharia, right? So the two things come together, right? So that's it, really. That's why it's a very, very important subject.
Yeah. And related point to this is something that you mentioned the last time that you covered this topic, that the whole idea, I mean, not the whole idea, some of the justification that was made for following madhabs was actually because of decision
Yep.
paralysis. It's very difficult if you're just there trying to analyze everything and analyze a
Yeah.
particular philosophy of a school. And you also gave the example of the cat and what was it? Which are
Yeah, the cat and the fox.
the cat and the fox? Yeah. So
Yeah.
maybe you can start off with that because I think that's
Okay,
important.
so I mean, there's this old story, and it seems to be a very ancient story. It's known as one of Aesop's fables, but the origins of this story seem to go way, way back beyond that. And it just shows that we're not the first human beings amongst human beings to think deeply about the human condition, right? So yeah, the story of the cat and the fox is the cat and the fox are sitting there and they have a common enemy, and the common enemy is the pack of hounds. The pack of hounds are both, the dogs are both after the fox and the cat. So they're discussing escape strategies. How are we going to escape the fox? And the cat says, listen, Mr. Fox, I don't have a plan. I just literally, that's it. I just run for the nearest tree. That's it. I see a tree, I run for it. I have no other escape plan. I just got one escape plan. When I hear the hounds, that's what I do. And the fox says, no, look, I have figured out 15 escape strategies. Yeah. 15 different strategies that will fit 15 different scenarios, and I'm working on more. And just as the fox is beginning to elaborate on his various strategic options, sure enough, they hear the pack of hounds around the corner. And so the cat just automatically, strategy one, bolts up and runs towards the nearest tree and gets up. Meanwhile, the fox is trying to figure out which of his 15 strategies he's going to employ at this particular stage. Yeah. But by the time he's got through strategy number 5, the hounds are already there and they rip him to shreds. So yeah, the point of this whole, so this is another what they call a cognitive bias, or it's a potential form of human dysfunction.
Yeah.
And a potential form of human dysfunction is analysis paralysis. Is that sometimes we can over analyze a situation, and we analyze it so much that we actually end up doing nothing.
Yeah.
And obviously that can be a very dangerous thing to do. And most of us, to be honest, also suffer from the opposite of that. And the opposite of that is always reacting like the cat, and literally thinking that every single shout and every single cry is a pack of hounds. Yeah. Actually, this is interesting because Allah innuates that the munafiqun, this is like the munafiqun, they think that every cry is against them. They think that everything is raised is something about them, right? And often this is how a lot of us live in this state, and this goes back to our egos, right? This goes back to the fact that we have these fragile egos with these carefully constructed stories that protect our egos. And then when we find something that seems to threaten our idea of who we think we are, right, which is really just the story we've told ourselves, then we'll react as if it's a pack of hounds actually coming to rip us to bits. It's not, of course. It's just someone challenging your fragile hallucinations about who you think you are, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that's it. We give this this image of ourselves that we've constructed. We look at it as if it is us, and we treat a threat to it as if it's an actual threat to our life. And so this is the problem with a lot of human beings right now. They're on hyper, they're constantly flooded with what would you call it? What's the chemical? The stress chemical.
Cortisol.
Sorry?
Cortisol.
Yeah. We're constantly studied with stress, the cortisol, the stress chemical. We're all constantly feeling that we're on the alert. We're constantly being triggered with dopamine as well.
Yeah.
So, but at the same time, sometimes we do suffer from this analysis paralysis. And again, it's partly to do with the fact, again, that we have access to so much information, right? We
So,
literally at our fingertips on this phone that we're,
yeah,
doing this live appeal right now. Literally at our fingertips is an unprecedented wealth of information. So the irony is that there are times when actually we should just have a simple strategy and execute
yeah,
it. We don't, because we're so busy trying to get everything right and trying to think of every single eventuality to make sure we don't get caught out. But in fact, that's unfortunately what we do. And maybe we don't get ripped by the hounds, but we often end up missing the boat. We miss the deadline. We miss the opportunity. Yeah, so this is what can happen.
yeah. And as you were speaking, I thought it was a good segue to talk about the fact that a lot of young people who want to get involved in dawah, they'll watch a whole
Yeah,
bunch of videos where it'll talk about everything from philosophy to science to geometry to history to poetry. But if we
yeah,
have ORAP, if we have a
yeah,
simple system where you just climb up a tree,
absolutely,
you just go straight up.
absolutely.
Yeah,
And the thing is that in reality, you see, the fox didn't need his 90. He didn't need 15
yeah,
strategy. He really didn't, right?
yeah,
He just needed one simple plan, right? So the danger is we are over analyzing when we don't need to. Obviously, sometimes we do need to analyze something, right? The real problem comes when, and so with dawah, what are your chances that you are going to encounter a philosophy professor,
hmm,
right? 90% of the time, unless you're at university, right? Or unless, even at university, to be honest, even at university, like the level of people at university is not that high. It really isn't. Yeah.
yeah,
Okay. So, I mean, the reality is it's very, you're talking about 1% of 1% of people who have the level of knowledge where you need to learn these type of things. You don't need these arguments. You just need the cat strategy, right? Or you need the go rap. You really do. Go rap works for 95, maybe even 99% of situations. It's going to work. Yeah. You'll have a few situations where it won't. But that's all you need. When it comes to dawah, you don't need a lot. Why did the Prophet say, "Ballighu anni wala ayah"? Convey from me, even if it is one ayah. If there's one ayah, one verse of Quran, you really understand it and you know it and you understand what it means,
yeah,
pass it on.
yeah,
Simple.
yeah. And the problem, as you pointed out, is within a few seconds, we can be flooded with information and resources, not just about DAO or anything else. But, in your previous live stream, you gave the example of when you want to go out for a walk,
Yeah.
you have a whole bunch of different gear and
Yeah.
doesn't doesn't actually, the resources don't help in this case.
It really doesn't. And you know what? I realize a lot of the time it does. I sit there thinking, you know what? It really doesn't matter. It's not like I'm actually making it, it's not like I'm doing an Arctic expedition. It's not like I'm Shackleton. Yeah. I mean, even you look at Shackleton, the poor guy, those guys had nothing. Literally, they had, in real terms of Arctic equipment, it was ridiculous how poorly equipped they were, but they
Yeah,
survived. Yeah.
yeah,
So like you're only going out most of the time, you're going out for an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, maybe 5 hours, right? I mean, what do you really need? And you'll be back in your warm home pretty quick. And you can, there's the reality, the idea that you're going to come across some, extreme survival situation is not, it's not going to happen, right? It's very unlikely. So yeah, that's exactly the thing. And it's great to have all the it's great to have all the nice gear. It really is. Yeah. I mean, I literally could almost, I mean, I have all the gear that I could literally dress for any any scenario that you can think of, right? In terms of weather, right? Whether it's a downpour, extreme cold, very hot, I have it. But the problem is, yeah, it's all sometimes you just need to just chuck whatever on and just get out there, because it doesn't matter. Go and get some fresh air. The point is you're missing the whole point.
yeah,
And the other thing is it does become an excuse, right? This is what the other thing I realized. It's literally you make an excuse. You're giving yourself a reason for procrastination. And procrastination is one of the, that literally it's the killer, right? It's the thing that kills so much time, kills so much potential, dispenses with so many beneficial things that we could be doing, and we don't because we procrastinate. And sometimes it's just an excuse. You see, this is where it comes, that you have to be honest with yourself, right? And maybe that's more important than anything else, right? If you can just look at yourself in the mirror and say, you know what, you're just making excuses. You want to be a lazy git. You want to sit on your backside in a nice warm house, and you don't want to go out, and you're just making excuses. So stop it. Just be honest with yourself. It's just way better. Because if you're not honest with yourself, how are you ever going to get to the stage when you can tackle the real problem, which is what's going on in here, right? So yeah, no, that's another thing.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That's,
So it's that link between, the analysis paralysis and is there something deeper going on, right? Is it really that you have to, because even this can become so even all of these cognitive dissonances, when you start knowing enough about them, your mind, you will play tricks on yourself, stories within stories. Yeah, you've got a story going on within the story. It's almost as if you feed your mind the information, right? And then your mind will use that information to confuse you even more.
Yeah. And you're gonna ask, what color is the cow? How big should it be, young or old? we like you mentioned, it's the old story of Bani Israel. They didn't want to do this.
They just didn't.
If you want to do something, you'll actually do it. And something that you've previously spoken about in your videos is about how you essentially have an energy bar when it comes to decision making, and the simpler you make your life, the more likely you are to actually spend time on the bigger actions. So wearing the same clothes every day, and
these are that's a good point. Well-known strategies, used by, they're well-known strategies. Steve Jobs famously had one outfit. He only had one outfit. That's it. He didn't have to think about what he was going to put on in the morning. That is just half an hour less stress, because it is stressful. That's the first thing. It's stressful, no doubt. That's why a crispy white thobe, you can say whatever you like about it. That's it. You got your thobe, you got your distasha. That's it. You got one less decision to make. You know what you're going to wear. That's it. Like, what else are you going to wear? Right? That's not a bad thing. You're going to put your abaya on. That's it. Who cares what's underneath it? It doesn't matter, right? These are very simple things that simplifies your life, even in terms of what you've got in your house, right? The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam had so little. They said there was nothing in his house, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, except cleanliness. He had nothing, right? But another thing I want to mention, and here's a weird thing as well, right, is that doesn't apply to keeping yourself busy. Now, here's a weird thing, and I'm sure most of us have experienced this, right? The more busy you are with genuinely productive things, the more you find yourself doing genuinely productive things.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm sure you will find that, the more you are genuinely productive, the more you use that time in a genuinely productive way. Right. And isn't it incredible that when you've got plenty of time, you've got no deadlines, you've got nothing particularly that you have to do, and you don't find time to go for a walk, to go to the gym, to, read Quran seriously. Yet somebody who has literally, they're busy from 6 a.m. and genuinely productively busy from 6 a.m. till 10 o'clock at night.
Yeah.
They read the Quran, they go to the gym, they cook their own food, they'll, whatever it is, they've got all of this stuff sorted out, right?
Yeah.
And they manage to fit all of these things in. And I'm sure all of us have, I've certainly experienced that. Is that actually a lot of the time, the busier I am, the more productive I get. But that's busy, genuinely busy, because there's the genuine busy, and then there's the saying you're busy and thinking yourself busy and making yourself busy when you're not.
Yeah.
You're not actually doing anything that is really productive, and that is actually, like, the point being, if you're scrolling through your phone, you might like to think you're busy. right? And you certainly get the feeling of being busy. And sometimes you are watching a literally, maybe hours of content that actually is quite informative, right? It's addictively informative, right? I mean, like any single one of these things might actually genuinely impact on your life. But the problem is you're not spending enough on anything to be able to actually get any benefit from it. That's the first point. But the point being, anyway, the point I want to make is, if you put your phone down, what would you have lost? If you put your phone down and actually gave your attention to something else, would you have lost anything? Would you have regret? My daughter actually confronted me with this really interestingly. One of my daughters, she sat down and confronted me with this yesterday, right? She said, what are you going to lose if you put your phone down right now? And I put my phone down and I couldn't answer her because I was thinking, this is really deep. Yeah. Because I genuinely felt at that moment I was really immersed in what I was doing. Right. And I felt that I was doing something genuinely. I felt I was being informed. I felt I was learning something. Right. I felt that there was some genuine, I was keeping connected with something. But when I put my phone down and I thought about it, I realized, you know what, there's nothing I'm really going to miss. There's nothing really that important that if I don't do it. And her whole question is why are you doing that? Why, whatever. That's from a kid, that's from a teenager, right? Well, she's older than a teenager now, but like someone who you would expect them to be immersed in scrolling on their phone and social media, but asking me that question, it was really good. So it lasted about a day. Let's joke,
It's
bro. It lasted about a day. No, I mean, alhamdulillah, at least I found myself today actually doing a few more genuinely productive things.
yeah. It's interesting you say that about the scrolling. The guy who, the marshmallow experiment you have in your willpower, right?
Yeah.
So he's mentioned in the book Stolen Focus, the book I recommended
Okay, I
previously.
still have to read that.
Yeah, so it's
Like
I don't know how to describe it. It's just one of the best books I've read in a while. So he speaks about meeting the professor who came up with the willpower experiment,
Oh.
and he goes and meets him. I don't know where, Australia. I don't know where he tracks him down in some obscure university, and he's talking to the professor about willpower and stuff. And the professor says, "You know what? Nowadays, I just find myself scrolling on my phone."
You know what?
The guy who came up with the experiment is now,
Yeah.
I don't know, playing Candy, whatever it's called, Crush or whatever.
Yeah, Candy Crush or whatever, right? Yeah. I mean, I find the same thing. I've done this willpower course. I guess the thing at the end of the day is that, even in my willpower course, one of the things, having gone through it, one of the things that's very clear to me is that even before the whole thing of willpower comes in, right? You still, and I've mentioned this in the course, right, is that you still have to make a decision. There has to be a point where there's something in your life that you want to change, and then you genuinely want to change it, right? So the willpower strategies come in when you've made that decision and you've made that commitment, right? And it's not enough just to have a genuine decision to make a commitment. I mean, that's the first step in really change happening, right? And again, remember in the willpower course, you have to be very careful, right, of just constantly making decisions and making commitments, right? Because that itself becomes an addiction, because it gives you the feeling as if you're changing, whereas in fact you're not changing anything, right? But the point being, anyway, it goes back to it still needs someone or something needs to happen in your life to make you think, wait a minute, this thing I'm doing is not good, right? You understand? It's not good that I'm overweight, right? And most of us know that, but we don't care, because why? I prefer chocolate. I prefer that. That's how it was. I would say, I don't care. I would literally say, I don't care. Yeah, I know it's good to be slimmer and thin, but I enjoy eating chocolate. I enjoy eating tubs of ice cream, and I don't really care. There's nothing that made me really care enough but then something happens to make you care.
Yeah.
Right. And it's got to be the same with scrolling, right? Like you can say, yeah, I just spend my time. Well, like I guess you're a professor. Everyone knows who you are. You've done your, you've probably contributed more to psychology than 90% of even people in your field, right? You've done it, you've made it. I don't know what keeps a person going when they've got to that stage. Do you understand what I'm saying? Like he may feel quite happy playing Candy Crush and scrolling through TikToks. You may not care anymore, right?
Yeah.
And I guess that's the question you have to ask yourself, right? Those are the things, like we can make each other care. We can remind each other. That's what's
Yeah.
important, you know. والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. And that's that important thing, that tawasaw bil haqq, to remind each other, right? To be productive, to be better human beings, to keep improving yourself.
Yeah.
That's the best thing. Can you imagine when one of your own kids, that's an answer to your dua, right? When your own wife or your own kid is reminding you and, in a sense, telling you, fear Allah and do something better with your life. But alhamdulillah, you're the one who helped imbibe that into your child. That's just a beautiful thing. That's what you want. What more does a person want from your nearest and dearest than something like that?
Yeah.
I know in some cultures, right? It's like, how dare you speak to me? Who the hell do you think you are? That's
Coming.
why they're doomed. I mean, cultures like that are, you can just look for yourself and see.
Yeah. Absolutely. And when you was earlier speaking about not making decisions and uh, getting more information and saying, well, I need more information to make a decision. You said, well, you previously said, and maybe you can elaborate on this, that sometimes it's the fear of making a bad decision,
Yeah.
but it's better to make a good decision than a perfect decision, which
Yeah.
it comes at a time when the opportunity is gone.
I think, yeah, it's the not the fear of making a bad decision, right? It's the fear here in this particular instance of not making the best decision, or not making the perfect decision, or not making the right decision. And in this particular instance, the right decision, would be the perfect one. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So the point being is that no, it's better that you make a decision, and you make a decision that's achieves something than you make no decision,
Yeah.
because no decision achieves nothing, right? No decision. I mean, even to be honest, a bad decision still achieves something, as long as you're ready to learn. You've learned that that particular thing didn't work.
Yeah.
So, famously, there are so many famous people, but Edison is the one who comes to mind. Like famously, how many 1,000 times he learned how not to make a light bulb,
Yeah.
right? He'd never looked at it as a failure. He just said, okay, that's not the way to do it, right? But each one of those experiments was a decision, right? It's better you make those 1,000 decisions and get it wrong, because as long as you're learning, you've at least learned, okay, that's not the right way to do it. And
Yeah.
so many people say that success is really just, learning from your failures. That's what success is, right? In anything, whether it's sport or business or whatever, right? It's learning from your failures, right? So it's better that you make decisions, right? And don't. I mean, there's a saying I love this saying: don't let perfection be the enemy of doing good. Yeah, this is a really good saying. However, the way the world is right now, this is the sort of Zeitgeist with the cancel culture. This
Yeah.
unfortunately has almost produces the opposite effect, right? It's as if you could do 100 things right. No one will remember those 100 things right. You do one thing wrong, and it's not even really badly wrong, right? You do one thing wrong, or you say one thing that goes against whatever it is, the status quo or the whatever, and you are cancelled. You are treated as if you have never, ever done a good thing, right?
Yeah.
And that is a shockingly bad way for society to behave. Yeah, that is really unconstructive. And that's going to be a go nowhere fast society if we allow a culture like that to dominate. I mean, no, you have to look at everything holistically. You have to look at the whole of a person. You have to look at everything they have done. But
Mm.
we see this again and again, Sabor. People have dedicated their lives to, for example, anti-racism. They say one thing that one group of people doesn't like, one mistake, one whatever, and it's treated as if this person never has done anything. They are cancelled, they are not listened to. It's not only is it disgusting, not only is unjust, not only is it oppressive, what sort of society are you creating?
Yeah.
You're creating a society of people who will not be ready to take decisions, will not be ready to put their neck on the line, will not be ready to stand out and stand up and, be counted and be heard. This is what you'll get. All they'll be ready to do is just bear like sheep.
Mm.
Now, I'm sure there are some people who would like us all to be like that. There are
Yeah.
some people who would like us all to be sheep because they want us to be sheep, because they want to, they want to slaughter us, not literally, but figuratively. They just want to use us like sheep. There are some people, a few people who would like us to all be sheep, right? I don't think that's how we should be, however. That's not really good for the collective human race.
Yeah.
And it sounds like to me that could be a road for disaster, not progress. But yeah.
And this is linked to what you mentioned earlier about sincerity, because if you're sincere, then you shouldn't worry so much about making a bad decision when overall what you are doing is making a decision according to the best information that you have.
Yeah.
So, one of the things that you emphasize in IRA a lot as well is a deadline is a deadline.
Yeah.
Like whatever you need to do, you have to take action before that deadline.
Yeah.
A lot of people, they're just scared of failure, and therefore they just don't take any action, when not taking action is far worse than the failure would have been.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, just forget even, a deadline is a deadline. Some people don't even give deadlines. Like, that for me is like on a management level, but even on a human level, even on your everyday life level, right? The general thing is, if you don't have deadlines, you will just keep on drifting on and on and on. That's
Yeah.
just the nature of things, right?
Yeah.
So, like, even if the deadline, just number one is just give everything a deadline. That's the first thing. Again, I teach that in the willpower course is one of the things I teach, right? Smart goals. You have smart goals. Part of smart goals is they are timely. That's the T of smart at the end. Timely is you give it a time, right? You're going to be specific. You want to make your goals specific. You want to make them, measurable. You want to make them attainable. Okay. You want to make them, I forgot what the R stands for, and you want to make it timely, right? So all of these things is like, if you want to achieve something, dig down. How much of that do I want to achieve? Let's be specific. Let's break it down into things that are actually realistic and attainable, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so and give yourself a time, give yourself a deadline. I want to achieve this and this by this and this amount by this time, right? So just doing that and then writing it down will make you, fit 60% more likely to actually achieve the goal.
Yeah.
Just that, right? Just that, right? So obviously, then you want to, obviously, then you want to give yourself consequences as well. Like that's another, again, that's one of the things we learn is, there's consequences for not, reaching those deadlines. And the funny thing is, I mean, the weird thing is that we need to play tricks on ourselves.
Mm.
And even though we're doing it to ourselves and we know ourselves that we're just playing a trick, yeah, it's incredible how it just works, right?
Yeah.
It's almost like there's this, there is this
Ghost
sort of
machine.
inner battle going on between different yous, different selves that you have, right?
Yeah.
And it's almost like you have to outsmart yourself.
Yeah. And you spoke about right in the beginning these cognitive biases, which are essentially shortcuts that we have, or parts of our dispositions. And if we don't know what, okay, so there may be somebody who is very hasty, and then
Yeah.
so they need to slow down. There may be somebody who is actually a perfectionist, and they need to speed up. Going back to the original thing that I started off with, and we can end the stream on this, inshallah, is personal development. How will this help your spirituality? Can you just emphasize that point?
Well, the main important thing, like I said, is at the end of the day, the reason why you want to work on yourself, you want to do that inner work, you want to do that work on yourself, is because you will never be able really to achieve or to even understand what it means to be sincere.
Yeah.
And like, you find, like, I mean, obviously I'm talking in the language of Islam, I'm talking as a Muslim, and I'm sure most of the people who are listening are Muslims. So we talk about ikhlas, right? That's what we talk about, ikhlas. But even for non-Muslims, right, they have some concept of that. They talk about keeping it real, for example, right? Keeping it real. And they understand how problematic it is to tell yourself stories.
Yeah.
Because if you keep telling yourself stories and you keep protecting your ego, you're not really ever going to achieve your full capabilities.
Yeah.
That's the number one thing. You're not really going to be able to achieve your full potential. That's the first problem. And secondly, most of the time, you are going to be miserable. You really are not going to be happy. And this is, again, another thing I've noticed, that, even people who are not Muslim, they figured this stuff out. They've begun to, they figured out this thing that the more you live in this ego and this, this bubble and this image of what you call yourself, the harder you're going to have to fight to protect it. And the unhappy you are, right? And then the more ready you become to make other people's lives miserable to fulfill your own story of what you think is important to yourself, right? So, I mean, it has many, many consequences, right? And it has many consequences. So there are many, many reasons. I mean, you will be a happier person. The more honest you are with yourself, the more real you are with yourself, the happier you're going to be. Ultimately, that's the reality. And inshallah, from the Islamic perspective, how are you? I keep reiterating. I mean, I say, like, been giving these talks, for quite a while now. I sort of slowed down and stopped, but I think it was for 2 years. And I think almost every single time I say, why is this topic so important? I mention it again and again. It's to do with sincerity. How are you going to be sincere to Allah if you keep lying to yourself? How will you know what is motivating you? That's the question. That's what sincerity is. Are you doing it for the sake of Allah? If you can't be honest with yourself about who you are and what is motivating you, how will you know whether you are doing it for Allah or for some other reason? How will you know? You can't. The only way you can know is by doing this work of stripping yourself bare and, being honest about who you are. Now, I think, interestingly, Sabur, bro, it's very interesting that I think that in a sense, not the converse, it's not the converse, but it works the other way around, right? If a person really loves Allah, truly loves Allah, right, and they truly want Allah's pleasure, and they want to please Allah more than anything else, right, and they try hard to be sincere, their mind will be open, their heart, their, it's like, this is what I guess, this is the sort of thing they call kashf. Yeah, it's like it's not like it's literally like you will begin to understand all of this stuff. You don't
Yeah.
need to read any books on, honestly don't need to read any books on psychology. You will begin to spot this stuff yourself. You will begin to see yourself for who you really are. That will happen to you, right? The same thing, if I go back to, this is interesting, Sabor, right? The same thing with all this willpower stuff. And I've thought about this a lot, right? I mean, even though I teach this willpower course, there is another way to achieve all of that stuff without ever studying any of that willpower stuff, right? You can achieve all of it if you reach a level of taqwa. If you reach that level of taqwa, you don't need any of that stuff, right? Because your mindfulness of Allah will drive you to be in control of your nafs, right? And to regulate your willpower and to give you the control to be able to achieve whatever you want in terms of being mindful of Allah and keeping away from sins. And not just that, in terms of making yourself the best human being that you can possibly be, whether it's in your health, whether it's in your character, whether it's in business or whatever, because all of this is there in Islam, right? So it can work two ways, right? You can use this stuff to help you build your taqwa, but if you have enough taqwa, you'll have this stuff under control already. The same thing, you can use this stuff to develop your sincerity, but if you really, really have that depth of sincerity, you will automatically, it's almost as if this knowledge will come to you, right? You'll see it for what it is. You'll know when you're telling stories to yourself. How do people know? Some people don't know the difference between their own thoughts and what shaitan is putting in their head. Have you ever experienced that, Sabur? Was there ever a time in your life you didn't really know? Was this me or was this shaitan? Lots of people have this problem, right? Why?
Or even Sheikh, sometimes you think you're doing something for the sake of Allah, but deep down there's actually an ad hoc rationalization.
Okay, but I'm just talking here about shaitan. Like, so that's I'm just going to a big extreme, yeah. But I don't know, bro. In my years, I've had lots of people. They just don't know the difference. When is it my own thoughts? When is it shaitan?
Yeah.
Like, it certainly happened to me, right? It certainly happened to me. The only way you know is by reading the Quran, by studying the Sunnah, by sincerely wanting to please Allah. And when you live your life according, then you will know. Then you very quickly know, right? Because you know what's halal, you know what's haram. The halal is clear, the haram is clear, right? You know when it's shaitan coming to bother you. You know when it's shaitan putting thoughts in your head. But if you don't know that stuff, bro, if you have no ilm, you have no knowledge, right? You have no understanding, you have no fiqh of the deen, of course you will get confused.
Yeah.
Of course shaitan is going to confuse you, right? You won't even know what's your voice or what's shaitan's voice.
It's a scary thought.
Yeah.
Allahu Akbar. Okay, Sheikh, that was a wonderful talk. Inshallah, we'll be back next week. Everybody watching, please could you subscribe to Sheikh Abdurraheem Green's YouTube channel? And actually, he hasn't been posting much.
No, nothing, bro.
Oh, come on. That's a no-no for the algorithm. You know, one thing you should do is you go on your mountain biking and your walk, these types of things, and you're putting up some videos of that. I think people really enjoy
I do,
it.
bro. I have so much footage. It's honestly not that. It's the editing.
Decision paralysis.
I have literally hours and hours and hours. It is literally just sitting down, putting it together. And as much as I enjoy the editing, but it is a whole art form and a whole process in and of itself, right? And it's actually quite exhausting,
Okay.
So the filming is the easy bit. It's the putting it all together and editing it.
There's actually a solution which is linked to decision paralysis.
Yeah.
If you have a laptop.
Yeah, of course I do.
And you have a editing software.
Yeah, I do.
Okay, if you just tell yourself that I am only going to film on my phone and upload it using whatever I have on my phone, basic program you have, you will actually upload. when you have your laptop and your Premiere Pro and these things, I was speaking to
No, it's true. It's true. And
I'll give you an
go on.
example of a YouTuber who's doing really well at the moment, Ali Dawa. So I was speaking to him about his, mashallah, he's putting out content all the time, and he doesn't actually use a laptop. He says, I just use my phone.
Yeah.
So sometimes if you restrict yourself like the cat and you say, I only have one strategy, and what I do, something, because I'm really lazy when it comes to editing, I don't even edit sometimes. I just upload.
Yeah. I do. In fact, the funny thing is, second last thing that I did was all done on my phone. It literally was all done on my phone. I filmed it on my phone. I went for a walk with the kids. Everything was filmed on the phone, edited on the phone, put it together. It was beautiful, really, really nice. Yeah, I just went for a little picnic with the kids and did it. The thing is, you see, I'm not trying to make excuses here. When I'm going mountain biking, a phone is probably not the best thing to be sticking on your mountain bike, because it'll go flying off and break and this and that. So like that's the one time when I have to get the the action camera out, and then and sometimes the drone, because it just gives a beautiful effect. So I have stuff. There's this video I want to do called The Fool. It's all about, it's literally a combination of some of my fools, right? Which is, so I have stuff that is just sitting there. But and the other thing is that, what is it, bro? It's the zombie scrolling, bro. Zombie scrolling. I should be getting down, doing some editing. It's that time of year, actually. This is winter, the time of year when you get down and do some editing. I don't really feel like going out that much, but yeah, Jazakallah khair, bro.
Alhamdulillah. Thank you so much for your time, Sheikh. Everybody watching, please make sure you subscribe and tell others about Sheikh Green's channel. We'll be live, inshallah, next week. We will be covering decision fatigue. That's going to be an interesting topic. So until
very similar but different to this.
It is.
All right, bro.
Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.